Some kind of automation will definitely help it out, speed up, and also meet those metrics, right? As a human, we cannot scrutinize maybe like not more than 100 applicants, right? It's just literally not possible. We always prefer to have a live interaction with the candidate to better assess and better understand how they perform in different environments. How can this person bring a good positive change in the culture within the organization without drastically shaking up things?
Shafeeq, welcome to the Objective Hiring Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Tim. Nice to meet you and nice to have you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. And I would love to start by discussing AI. Probably the two most said words or said letters in the last year or so. And within the context of hiring, I personally feel like there's going to be some fairly dramatic changes over the next few years with how hiring's done. To begin with, I'd love to get your sense of, how do you think or see candidates are currently using AI in the hiring process, and have you started to double using AI on your side when hiring people?
Yeah, so AI, my organization, from perspective of hiring and automation, no, we haven't really used it yet. We are exploring it on obviously other different avenues of use, but hiring is something I think it's going to take some time, but we might start small. Like we might start with maybe resume parsing, maybe assessing the skills of the candidates, filtering out the candidates. So that's how we are planning to take it, because recruiting is kind of a human. Uh, it's always involves a human interpersonal touch kind of thing, right? So, and also with AI, there is the ethical challenge of bias and fairness, right? So, um, to deal with that, I think we'll be starting small, but as of now, haven't started yet on fully incorporating AI into our hiring process.
Yeah, I feel like that's where most companies are at the moment. What I am hearing a lot of is that the candidates have certainly started to adopt it. What have you seen from that side of the market?
Yeah, from that side of the market, it's it's really difficult now to filter out the candidates because people are using the GPTs or LLMs to make your resume like it's like 100% match, which is like literally not possible. When you see a couple of resumes, you see like the roles and responsibilities like point to point match, and that's how you figure out the candidates are just trying to game and trying to squeeze out through the process, right? So that's how I feel from the candidate's point. But I think uh, from from the positive note, I think AI could make the candidate's experience better, like especially on the feedback side. So there's often neglected part is on the candidate side. They often don't get clear feedbacks, what went wrong, what went well, or those kind of sort of things. So I think maybe the use of AI on the candidate side would really revolutionize the process, the steps for them, make it faster, or provide them with enhanced feedbacks.
And when you say feedback, this is feedback at the application stage, or this is feedback post interview? Where are you thinking?
Yeah. Mostly, the most common thing that we are that is commonly heard, but across the candidates is like most often they're ghosted by their recruiters, right? So that's their most common point of concern. And some candidates have like they nail the interviews, they rock everything, the whiteboard sessions through the application process, but still they don't get any feedback, or they just get a generic email that okay, we are hiring with going forward with a better candidate. So that they can get some kind of feedback. Okay, these things were good. These things were something that we found someone else who was better than you. Then I think that would really help them um, prefer going forward, right? They can apply for a different role within the same organization. So yeah, it's gonna help them help us.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of the big opportunities to improve the process, as you say, especially if we automate the early screening stages based on CVs, applications, what have you. Presumably, if we were to do that, the tool that is used to evaluate those applications and score them and decide, well, here's the three candidates you should be interviewing, we recommend. That same feedback can be collated and given to the candidate. You know, here's where you came short, here's where you were strong, here's how we evaluated you. And that could all be done actually pretty trivially. I don't think that's a, I think there's a technical challenge in doing that at the moment with where large language models are at. So I guess it's just a case of waiting for the applications to be built to incorporate that. And then maybe some openness from companies to actually do that, because right now there would be companies who would be interviewing people. They have the feedback internally. They've added notes to their HR system, but they're deliberately not sharing that with the candidate for fears of legal repercussions, or maybe it's like a clunky extra manual step or something. So I wonder if even if we have the way to do this more easily, some companies might still be reluctant to share that with candidates. What do you think?
Yeah, that's true. There is always a point of legal concern, and there is always that's why we have the recruiters and the HR involved. They kind of filter out and they act as a bridge between us and the candidates. So maybe having a clear out if we are using the AI, if everything gets better, the systems or the data set the tool uses, it's trained well enough that it can avoid the unconscious bias in future. And we can also provide the candidate with exactly how AI is being used in the process of the interview journey. Then I think it would make sense. But at this present stage, we are not at that point. So yeah, that's I understand the reason that we cannot share it openly, if even though if we want to. So yeah.
I also would love to delve into the bias fears in a bit more detail, because I think, yeah, perfectly legitimate that we would be concerned that we're about to unleash some technology that's making automated decisions, and then if that isn't monitored and controlled, God knows what could happen. My view, though, in hiring in particular, is that the current way hiring is done is already so biased and unfair with humans, so that implementing an I don't see how it could make it worse, in my view. And I'll give you a specific example. So I'm not sure if you've seen these studies, but in different countries around the world, researchers apply to roles with CVs, and try to measure the impact of having a certain name on a CV. So there was one in Australia a couple of years ago. University of Sydney researchers had thousands of different CVs. They grouped them into three buckets. The first bucket had Anglo-Saxon first and last name. Second bucket had Anglo-Saxon first name, Chinese last name. Third bucket had Chinese first and last name. Otherwise, the sets of CVs were similar in terms of skills and experience and what have you. The only difference were the names. They then applied to thousands of different roles in Sydney, Melbourne, different cities, senior roles, junior roles, engineering, data, marketing, admin, like a whole variety. And then they measured the callback rate. So either a literal callback on a phone or an email back, some indicator from the business saying, yes, we want to interview you. And this is a pretty good experiment, I think, because they've controlled for so many different variables. And they measured, as I said, the callback rate for the first group. That's the Anglo first and last name. There was a 12% callback. For the third group, which is the Chinese first and last name, was a 4% callback. And so this study seems to imply, all else equal, if you apply to a job in Australia with a Chinese name, you have only 1/3 the chance of a callback as if you applied with a white name, which, if they've thought of everything and they've controlled for all other reasonable variables, that is a staggering statistic that if I were Chinese, I would be pissed off about, because that is like blatant racism. You can call it unconscious bias, or you can just call it racism. You know, who knows how consciously people are making these decisions. So it might be a combination of both. But I feel like because that's the starting point of how unfair hiring can be, I'm struggling to imagine how a well designed and controlled AI system that at least would be transparent and is measurable and defensible. Like I'm struggling to see how that could make that worse. What do you think? Do you feel like there are ways that an AI could get out of control that go almost beyond that as well?
Well, as you mentioned, definitely the bias is there even now. Um, like the current interview process, how it happens, the statistics you mentioned say it, numerical, quantitative, it provides everything, right? So the AI tool that can help us is also dependent on the data that is fed into it. So the data is whatever the real world data. So if the data is balanced, then the tool is good enough. But at the same time, the real world also is imbalanced, right? So we get there is always bias in whichever industry you go to, like finance, or there are kind of niche industries where they only accept people from certain demographic. There is certain kind of um, mindset over there that these people from these regions are good for tech, these people from these regions are good for finance. It's similar in the US as well. Like finance is largely considered a Asian, Chinese, or those kind of demographic strong regions. Tech is considered like more like Indians or Asians from Southeast Asia, something like that, right? So that's a preconceived notion that AI can definitely help resolve that, provided the tool is safe and sound to use, is well vetted. But yeah, even though we use the tool, if we have those periodic audits of how the tool is performing, what kind of data it's being used, so the periodic human centric decisions that would help make this decision process even more unbiased, right? So I think the tool will definitely help going forward in future, and that's where we should be heading to get out of this situation. So I think the tool will definitely help, but there should be like a gated or some kind of mechanism that involves a human-centric decision making as well.
Yeah, that oversight and checking process is so important. And again, I feel like this is where an AI system, in theory, or any system actually, that does this in an automated way, can actually be audited in a way that a human one can't. So, for the current way that most companies do hiring, they get an application, they get a CV, and it's a human in an applicant tracking system clicking reject or send to next stage. But at no point is that person ever scrutinized. Why did you make that decision? What was it about the CV that you didn't like? Why did you choose to reject this candidate? We don't have any of that oversight at the moment. At least if this was mechanized in some kind of automated system, that system obviously has specific logic, it has rules that could be transparent and could be investigated in a way that you could never scrutinize what a human's doing. So I wonder whether this is going to be, again, a huge unlock in that we even have the ability to have this level of audit that we currently don't have.
Yeah, that's true because we have what you say the 4 second rule, right? Whether you catch the eye of a recruiter or not. So that's really how everything works right now in the industry. It's like whether the recruiter just has 4 seconds to view your application and toss it into the bin, right? So an AI can definitely enhance, provide the rationale between how many candidates you received, what percent of candidates didn't qualify, what qualified, but they could be missing some other things, like some things that can be trained, because it's not just about technical skills, it's about your other soft skills as well, right? Technical skills is something that you can teach someone, but soft skills are something that you have it within you. That cannot be, or it's really difficult to train that someone. It requires a lot of oversight than technical skills. So yeah.
I realized I was just on a call with someone half an hour ago where they had mentioned the last role they put up for a data engineer. This is in the United States. They received 3,000 applicants. They said they only managed to look at the first 250 and they had to stop. They literally did not have time to look at the next 2,750 applicants. And so at least in these current market conditions, maybe that's also an upside of automation is everyone gets an opportunity. So it's not that there's a biased human looking at the CV. It's like at the moment, 90% of them aren't even looked at. So if you'd applied a day late rather than a day early, you just didn't have a chance in this particular example. And I'm hearing, more and more companies just being flooded and inundated with applications. It's just not really having the technology at the moment to deal with that, and certainly not having people to deal with it either. So maybe some automation will just be needed because not for any bias reasons, just because they literally cannot get through the volume of applicants they're currently experiencing.
Yeah, I totally agree on that because, frankly speaking, that's how we have been seeing or we have been reviewing as well. Because there is only until a certain point that you can review the application that you receive, and it's just like you have the time factor, the time to hire, the quality of hire. So you have these metrics that you have to think about. So you have to go in a balanced way. You cannot just keep reviewing the applicants. Yeah, so some kind of automation will definitely help it out, speed up, and also meet those metrics, right? As a human, we cannot scrutinize maybe like not more than 100 applicants, right? It's just literally not possible. Even though if you are a full-time recruiter, the recruiter just sends it to the hiring manager. The hiring manager doesn't have the time to go through all those applicants. So it too, as you said, I agree with that. It should be there, especially in this current market where every role that is being posted out there, literally you receive like 100 to 200 applications within the first day or sometimes within the first hour also. So yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to find a way to deal with that volume and the bias. The other thing you touched on before was that the CVs are looking increasingly good, in inverted commas, in terms of their match against the job description, almost unbelievably good. I'm hearing that more and more that, the CVs seem to be matching the JD more. The CVs tend to be looking more like each other as well. That's what I'm hearing a lot, that it's kind of hard to pick from this sea of very good looking CVs. But we know the reality is that what's on a CV doesn't necessarily represent truth. So I wonder whether even if we automate this, even if we deal with the scale problem, even if we deal with the bias problem, we're still going to be left with the fact that we're making a decision based on pretty crap data, which is someone's opinion of themselves they put into a CV. So where is that going to go then? Like, do we need some new way to do the screening step? Like, even if, do we need some new data set, maybe is a better way of putting it.
Yeah, eventually that boils down to eventually some kind of screening or some kind of assessment you give out to these candidates, which you feel are a good fit, at least on paper. And you don't have the time to literally do those whiteboards or the technical interviews, the screening interviews with each of them. So maybe having a tool with those screening inbuilt within it helps you filter out these candidates, especially in this market where you get increasingly good CVs, which are very, very strong on paper, but hard to determine just by looking at it and hard to pass just by looking at it.
Yeah, I suspect that's where it will go because I personally feel like part of the issue with, especially the early stages of hiring, so that's, let's say, a CV screen and then a high-level HR behavioral interview, is both of them are quite heavily reliant on just believing what the candidate is saying. Like, there's not really a level of validation of exactly what they've done. You haven't seen them do work. You haven't seen evidence of that. And I feel like that's a root cause a lot of the inaccuracy is we just have to take their word for it until maybe they get into that whiteboarding session or you give them a take-home project or they do a test, and then you start to see the reality. But it's just the level of commitment and effort to administer that, for the candidates to do it, makes it, I think, quite challenging to do. Maybe in this market you can get away with it because you've got so many applicants that it doesn't matter. But let's say 3 years ago, at the peak of pandemic hiring, where you had so few applicants, you couldn't then give them and get them to validate everything because it was just they would drop off and they would go to another job because they had so many options. So it's interesting how the market changes through time, and the pain points change a little bit. And I guess then the hiring processes probably have to adjust a bit depending on the market you find yourself in. Have you found that? I believe you think back over the last few years.
Yeah, that's true. It's the hiring process always adapts based on the market scenario. So if come the pandemic situation, right? If there was a similar situation where we end up with fewer candidates, then obviously the level of scrutiny comes down because it's hardly difficult to find a candidate. We cannot have like 6 rounds or 5 rounds of interview with two technical, two managerial, two behavioral. So those all those things doesn't make sense. That so it just have to adapt with the situation, with the market scenario. It should be so volatile that it can adapt and it can move forward.
Are there any things in the process that are market agnostic? Like any things that you would recommend a hiring manager or a company do that just make the process unambiguously better, whether it's in a tight candidate market or a loose candidate market, things that are just not really a trade-off decision. It's just, it's better to do it this way. Anything that you've seen work really well?
So the way in any sort of market, the way we interview is obviously if the market is um, similar to what we have right now, we definitely have more screening, more technical rounds. But I think we should, the way we do it is we have a solid screening round that is just like a go no go kind of decision making. It is done by two people. They vetted it. The more the eyes, the better. So there's no bias in the decision of the screening. So we figure out a screening round that is valid depending upon either of the market scenarios, and we take forward the candidate based on the result of that. And the results are not not like judgmental. It's just like depends on the people who are reviewing the screening rounds. So it's basically like if I screen and I provide like we have a scaling system like red, green, yellow. So it's like yellow, maybe green is like definite, red is like definite no. So we have those kind of scaling metrics that we use and we discuss it among the team, and that's how we do it. And maybe having a screening system that doesn't, now it's involving a human, right? So if it can be automated, this kind of screening system, and it can be adapted to either of the times, whether it's a market high or market low situation, and I think it would help you at least get with the initial push. You have a solid subset of data, and from there, depending upon how the market is, you can scrutinize more, deep dive, and get your exact solid candidate, or you can get someone who you're okay, you're open to train, you're open to spend time to bring them up, to ramp them up, to speak to the client, to set new deliverables based on their skill set.
You mentioned that screening steps, so maybe having two people in there, which helps get a more broad perspective on the candidate. What are the things in particular you're looking for? Are you covering off technical things? Are you covering off soft skills, cultural fit? Like what is that? What is that process?
Yeah, initially the technical skills are being focused upon. So we look on the technical skills, and if the candidate is called out for an interview, that's only we can assess. Then only we can assess the soft skills part, right? So initially, it's just the technical skills, but it's from the perspective of people who wear different hats and with a different expertise. So a person with expertise in a certain technology might be very hard on something the candidate is performing, but a person with multiple flavors of technology backgrounds, they might be able to grasp the logic the candidate is putting forward, and they might appreciate the logic rather than the technology they're using. So having those multiple eyes helps that way. Soft skills is obviously every time requires some kind of interaction with the client. Having maybe recorded sessions might help, but we always prefer to have a live interaction with the candidate to better assess and better understand how they perform in different environments.
And in that step, then, are you trying to like replicate their interactions with a client and trying to almost, do you stand in as the client and give them like a brief and they're then the consultant? Like how do you evaluate that piece?
Sure. So we look at how their thought process is, like when they are approaching a problem, when they are trying to answer their past projects, for example, past challenges. How did they approach the problem? What did they face? How did they solve a team dynamics issue? Right? How did they solve the collaboration, the teamwork? Are they open to adopting new cultures, new work, new environments, or are they like an IC, an individual contributor, and they don't prefer to be working in a team environment? So these kind of things, we look at them. If it's a live session, then we obviously merge both technical interview and the soft skill interview together by asking them, while they approach the technical problem, share their thought process, like how they think through it, and see how they are performing under pressure and how they're responding to it, how they're keeping their nerves calm.
Right. Again, because that would replicate their real work in front of an actual client. I've heard of some consultancies when they will be interviewing for a potential consultant, they'll sometimes give them like a deliberately vague requirement, again, like a real client would do. And sometimes a confusing brief or a contradictory request and see how they deal with that if they have enough gumption to kind of push back. Is that part of what you're testing for as well, those kinds of things?
Of course, our assessments always involved incomplete or vague requirements. We're always looking to see how the candidate thinks, how they try to get to the answer by asking the right question, or getting them to think and have that interaction. It's just not about solving the problem and um, coming to the right solution. It's the process that matters, their thought process, and how they are able to pick, how they are able to arrive to that process. Actually, that's of course that's always into any of the screening that we do.
And in those interviews, because we're talking about feedback earlier and maybe the AI making the provision of feedback simpler, uh, can you imagine an AI system maybe being an extra interviewer or maybe just being invited to that call to summarize what the candidate said or summarize your feedback? Like, can you imagine the feedback step from an interview getting easier with AI? If you compare the way you currently do it versus what could be in the future.
Yes, definitely that would help both the candidate and the recruiter. From the recruiter point, it just helps them summarize the candidate statements, how the conversation went through, how the interview went through. From the candidate points, it summarizes the recruitment steps that involve the conversation with the recruiter, right? So yeah, it's a win-win for both sides. A tool hacking that it can take notes, it can take every part of conversation, it can capture some highlights of the conversation, the points, the past projects, the challenges, something that might have um, like missed out after the interview that might be really value add that could be passed on to the next interviewer, and that's down the line, and that might even make a break or makes a situation right. So I think that's will definitely be helpful.
Yeah, I feel like this is an absolute no-brainer at the moment because I don't know about you, but if I was doing interviews, let's say pre-AI, say a couple of years ago, pre-large language models, I should say, um, I would often do a lot of interviews in the same day, maybe 4 or 5 different candidates, try to get through them quickly. and I'd be in the interview and I'd be trying to kind of remember the types of questions I was trying to ask them the question, listen to their answer, engage in follow up, try to really focus on them as much as possible, keep an eye on the time, make sure I don't run over, take notes on what they're saying. Like that is such a cognitively complex thing to do that if we have just this system, and it's like some of the tools out there for sales calls and that kind of stuff are already top notch. Like they already do a great job at this. So the tech's available. Yeah, to kind of listen in, summarize, do the transcription, do the meeting notes, do the action items, whatever they are. Excuse me. That's such a no-brainer, I think, um, because otherwise there must be so much information lost. Like if you're just relying on the human to manually write down notes, how many notes can you really take? How accurate can it be? Did you really encapsulate everything? So it feels like surely this is the way we should be doing it.
Yeah, that's indeed true because at one time, yeah, as you said, like we've been interviewing 5 to 10 candidates. It depends on the role, right? Sometimes you won't need to fill in the role quickly. Sometimes you are like hardbound, like I'll just deep drive and drill down the candidates till I find the right candidate. So either way, you have to interview multiple people to approach to that situation. And when you have multiple candidates and you're working as well, it's really difficult to keep in mind what the conversation went on for an hour, right? So towards the end of it, you need a gist of okay, all the good things, all the highlights, what happened, what's really a value add. So yeah, so I think it will definitely be helpful, and it is really painful, or it is really difficult to capture everything that goes with each candidate, even though you might be asking similar questions just to gauge around the responses of each candidate. It's still difficult to keep track.
I spoke to one company this week who had hacked together an integration between Claude and Zoom transcripts. So they extract the Zoom transcripts from their interviews, pipe it into Claude, and then use Claude to actually do, yeah, the summarization, but also an attempt to actually score the candidates based on the answers they gave to the various questions that were actually asked in the interview. Not automating it, like they still have the score there for them, a human still reviewing it, like, do I agree with these scores or not? But again, I feel like that's certainly better than nothing or relying on a human to try to do it or a human inevitably not doing it. I feel like, yeah, a lot of the times this kind of AI versus this human way of doing it, sometimes we forget about the fact that it's not like we're currently perfectly scoring candidates in an interview and perfectly writing notes. It's that a lot of the time it doesn't happen because it's so clunky to do. So having even imperfect, slightly biased, slightly misleading AI summary is better than no summary, in my view.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There should be some tool that can help us with this. And having a tool that can help provide these kind of summary is often better with no summary, as you said. So yeah, it's more like passing down the line. So obviously there are always times, it's rarely that you just speak to one interviewer and you just hire the candidates. It always involves at least 2 rounds of interview before you can hire a candidate, and having a summary to be passed down to the next interviewer, that greatly helps, rather than just bullet points that you have scribbled down somewhere to be shared.
Yeah, and last time we did research on interviews, which was not that long ago, maybe 2 years ago, 20% of interviewers would write handwritten notes, like literally pen and paper. So obviously those handwritten notes are going nowhere. It's not even digitized. So yeah, the upside here I think is enormous. Um, but speaking of interviews, and we've kind of chatted through a few of the different types of things you're looking for. What about the cultural fit angle? This is something I feel like is a challenging area, especially as a data person. I'm sometimes a little bit suspicious of things that are immeasurable sounding, sometimes a little bit more like feelings rather than facts. I'd love to get your thoughts on cultural fit in general. And then, is there ever, in your view, a clash between fitting someone in with a culture, but then promoting diversity at the same time?
No, that's a great question. So I think the way we try to interview is we try to look at more of a culture add than a culture fit. So that way, we are trying to bring people with different perspectives and different thought process into our culture. But of course, there is always a difference of work culture between different fields of work. Suppose you are from a finance industry, all of a sudden you jump into digital marketing, which is all fancy and it's all like it's not it's just completely informal. The finance is like completely formal. It's all tied down approach. So it's there's always a difference in the culture, but that's how we try to interviews. We try to think from a perspective of culture add. How can this person add or bring a different perspective to the team, and rather than trying to mold them into a singular framework, right? So that's how we try to approach it.
And I'm interested in how far that stretches. So, for example, there must be like in your team a certain current balance, a certain equilibrium in the way you interact with each other, that what you would consider the better or worse ways of approaching the work. Uh, you know, I could imagine a candidate would come in with a very dramatically different way of communicating. Maybe they're very objectionable. Maybe they disagree with 95% of what you say. Maybe they're unusually direct in their feedback. Maybe they almost try to flip the interview around and then they're almost like attacking you. I guess for a lot of companies, that would be an outlier on the culture. You could argue they add, or you could argue they subtract. I guess you could say, like, what, yeah, how far do you think this goes? Is there still a general pattern you're looking for, or do you want someone that's genuinely going to like shake things up a bit?
Well, I think it's a balance of both. It's it again, but then it should match with the core values of the company or the culture that he's coming or she is coming into. So it's not. It's as you said. It's definitely an outlier situation. So a person who's gonna ground up, shift, shake everything, that's gonna be difficult to work with sometimes. But the person with a mindset of adaptability, whether he's open to hear out, whether he's open to take on new things, that now that's totally acceptable, totally fine. That's how we are looking forward to. There are people who are, especially in analysts, there are people who are very open, very broad, and they share out their findings, they project them. And there are some analysts who are just like coded style, they just deep dive, go into the problems. They don't really like to be in the limelight. So it's different people have different perspectives. So how can this person bring a good positive change in the culture within the organization without drastically shaking up things? That's what we are looking out for. So obviously technical is the first thing, but also the soft skills with the culture in mind, the culture add, the culture fit with culture add. That's what we are looking for.
I'm interested on the cultural angle. Uh, are there or have there been recurring patterns of where candidates have fallen down? Like, are there certain things that you would go, oh, they're not going to work in this environment? Common reasons why they might fail that stage.
Yeah, time to time we come across candidates, depending on the project. Again, always depending upon the project that you work on. Sometimes the project involves a client that's like heavy on communication. They're always on top of things. They always want to know everything. They want a call. They want a meeting. So then sometimes it's the opposite way around. They're chill, laid back. Just give me the result. I'm happy with it. So those kind of situations, some people can thrive to it, some people just cannot uh, take that. So that's the kind of situation that we had always faced. And we have always tried to help the candidates by setting up the expectations with the client, trying to ramp up the onboarding periods if that situation ever rises based on the feedback from the client, from the candidate. So that's how we try to circle around and close the gap over there.
So you touch on an interesting point there, which is that you're hiring a candidate, but because you run a consulting business, you're placing them with a client. So then is it a case of trying to fit them into your team's culture or your client's team's culture, or a combination of both?
That's a good question, and it's it's a difficult thing to uh, answer, or it's a difficult thing to say it on, because no project is going to be forever. So if even though we hire a candidate from a particular project's perspective, they might be working 6 months, maybe 6 years, and then they might have to shift to something else. So I think we look at a broader perspective where they meet in between our culture and also the client's culture, and they could just adapt based on that. So if they have the adaptability nature within them, I think that's how they can fit in, or they can put on multiple hats, right? So it's always about change. In consulting, it's always about shifting around, jumping into different work environments, different clients, different timelines with short deliverables. So yeah.
So adaptability is key. I think with a lot of companies, when they think about a cultural step, I wonder if they don't give candidates enough credit for their adaptability to a new culture. So I'll give you an example. I was recently traveling. So I live in Sydney. I was traveling to vastly different places to Sydney: Bangkok, Berlin, Riyadh. I'm not sure I could pick three more different cities in the world. And each of them, you know, you get there and you're a bit of an outlier. You don't automatically behave exactly the way that people there do, but you cotton on pretty quickly and start to almost like blend into the way that things are done there. So, for example, something as simple as in Thailand, you have interaction with someone maybe at a restaurant or a cafe. You don't just like take your coffee and walk away. There's like a little bit of almost a little bow and a slightly more grateful thank you with a bit more sustained eye contact than what you would have in Australia. And so, initially you're maybe adjusting to that, but then you adjust and you just become part of the culture. Unless you're, I think, a very disagreeable or very narrow minded person, you sort of blend in a little bit. And so I wonder whether for some companies, when they have this very clear culture they're evaluating, they give an interview, they give a candidate one interview and they're looking for X, Y, Z, and they feel like they don't quite see that. But maybe the candidate could adjust. Maybe they'd adapt within a couple of days, given the opportunity. Do you feel like sometimes companies are a bit too narrow-minded in the culture, a bit too fixated on what they're looking for?
I guess that could be true, because especially in the consulting industry, the way they hire is they try to match the candidate to the client's environment, the client's culture. So they try to emphasize it, whether the candidate can bring it immediately, rather than whether they can give a chance to the candidate, whether the candidate is open. So it's all about assessing the candidate during their interview and understanding whether they have that nature and providing them the chance. So it's all goes through the interview. So yeah, oftentimes it's like bring someone in and ramp it up immediately, kind of hire and continue approach, right? So that's why I think it's more often the candidates are often overlooked, even though they have the ability to adapt, they are often overlooked and they are just left out.
I imagine, thinking about it now, that if you're hiring consultants, uh, I could see how you have to be maybe even more sure that they're the right fit and they're the right candidate. Because not only, let's say you're a company that's not a consulting business, you hire someone, okay, they're maybe not the right person. You realize after a few months, okay, you can churn them out. It's a very unenjoyable experience for everyone, but it can work. But if you're a consultancy, you place them with clients, there's actually a reputational potential damage there if they're not the right person. Do you feel like that then means that for consultants, you have to be super, super sure they're the right person? Is there an element of extra risk there, do you think?
It depends upon how uh, risk or how high the role is, as per my thought process. So it's like if the candidate is on a pretty high managerial decision making role, then yeah, it's all about reputation. If you're hiring an analyst, then there is always scope. It's really difficult to find an analyst who's gonna perfectly fit into culture. Analysts just keep jumping around from different domains, different cultures, but their core remains same, that their thought process remains same, but they have the ability to adapt because of their work. So yeah, it's the consultant. I believe it depends upon the role. If you ask me, that whether how risk it is, it depends upon completely the role. The higher up the role, the more risk is for the consultant that's gonna work with the client.
And I guess part of that de-risking process is, again, having a thorough evaluation of the candidates. What are your thoughts on take-home assignments? Do you do those? Do you do it in combination with live interviews, maybe like a whiteboarding session? How do you think about those different tools?
We do a combination of both, but uh, take home assignments are great. It provides the candidates the ability to showcase their skills without the pressure of live performance. But at the same time, whiteboard sessions provides you the ability to assess how the candidates perform in a live performance. So both are great, both are good. A combination of it would be preferred, uh, but it all depends upon the market you're in, right? So um, if the market is as it is right now, then it's definitely both a combination of both to find the right candidate to get to know their skill set to showcase give them the opportunity to provide their entire skill set to assess them under pressure, how they think, how they interact, how they collaborate with the team. So yeah, I think a combination of both is how we take it up. But time to time, depending on the role, depending upon the timeline that we need to hire, we either take or we mostly take the whiteboard things. It's quicker for us to assess because take home assignments are really not, it can be overlooked or it can be overdone, just not by you, right? You can take someone's help, you can just get a GPT, you can just sort it out, especially in this scenario.
Yeah, and they typically also extend the time to hire because I'd say most companies would give candidates maybe a week-ish to complete, whereas in a whiteboarding session, a candidate who's kind of ready to go, you can maybe book them in tomorrow and just get through it in an hour, and then you're both done. And I feel like, yeah, again, for the consulting business, that step makes even more sense because so much of your job is actually thinking on your feet and talking to clients and being able to do stuff in real time. Whereas maybe for an analyst inside a company, I feel like that's less common. Like you're going to be doing more deep focused work that's maybe aligned a little bit more to the take home assessment. So it probably depends on the type of business you're running as well. And as you say, the market conditions, depending on what you can get away with in a sense.
Yeah, because the take home assignments is like you give them 1 week time and imagine you have 5 or 7 candidates and you give them, and each of the candidates may not be in the same phase, right? So you have to wait for all the 5 candidates to complete. Now, if it's a whiteboard session, you can just have it like 1 week, 3 candidates, other week, 2 candidates, and you can just make the decision over there. And you have a lot more valuable data or valuable insights of each candidate, how they're performing, how their skill set, soft skills, technicals. So, yeah, whiteboard is always a definite go-to for us.
And Shafiq, as one final question, if you had the proverbial magic wand and you could somehow fix the hiring process, like what would it look like? What would you do?
That's a great question. I think having a AI tool that could serve both ends of the process would be my go-to immediate magic wand thing. So it's like the candidate. right now there is so much missing or innovation lagging that there is no candid feedback or experience that they get it. So there's a lot of times you get a candidate ghosted. It's just because it's not because the recruiters don't want to. The recruiters just have too many candidates on their plate that they can't just provide each individual candidate with a detailed feedback. Even same case with the hiring manager. So having a tool that can do that for on behalf of the recruiter or the hiring manager or anyone else to the candidate is would be great. Same way for the recruiter, providing them with the detailed insight upon the interview completion, how the candidates, some kind of soft skill assessment based on the interview process itself, like a mix of everything for everyone would be great. That would be what I have to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. And I feel like we're not that far off. AI sometimes feels like magic. And I think lots of those things you mentioned there, I feel like current versions of large language models can attack and solve lots of this. And we just need to wait, 6 to 18 months for the application layer to catch up to really use these technologies, and maybe some behavioral change as well in organizations to adopt them, some legislation things as well. But I feel like we're so close to this magic wand scenario that you've painted. So I'm excited. Shafeeq, it's been great having you on the show. You've shared some wonderful insights for the audience. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me.